Hello. I think this time we're going to say mambo and everyone rumbles back poa. Okay? It's not, okay, mambo. Poa. Okay, that sounds good. I'm David Daballen from working for Save the Elephant, and what an honor to be here this afternoon. So I just want to mention a little bit my interaction with elephants as a young boy who grew up in northern Kenya all his life. So I grew up with elephants in my birthplace, a place called Marsabit, which is up in the north of the country where I was born and raised. Going to school or coming back from school, or even just herding livestock, I had very interesting interaction with elephants. And this can be very intimidating, especially walking on foot. So as I was growing up, I was very interested with elephants. Their amazing social structure. And I'm sure the elephants were so much interested, actually, with me, I just didn't know. So any other time that, I'll get any opportunity going out herding my, family livestock, I'll get up on a higher ground, whether it's up on a hill or up on a tree, and just watch them from a very safe distance. And some of the things that I've seen back in the day, which is a long time ago, are still so fresh, and probably this is why I'm here. And, big commotions of related groups, coming together, and I didn't know what it was, but, really big commotion. Baby elephants rolling in the mud and crawling on top of each other, or one of the things that just really amazed me when I was quite a young boy. Amongst my people, elephants are so respected and sometimes so feared in that when they rumble, it's like a rolling thunder from gods. Back in the day, or since time of immemorial, we've shared, landscapes with elephants and their cousins, and not just in Africa, but right across the world. Today, we would like to share a story of a female that we've known all her life. Through her story, we hope you'll be able to get a glimpse of the challenges that elephants faces, and we hope you can help us to give them a future. To take us through the tale is none other than a friend, a colleague, Save the Elephant CEO, and Frank Pope. So I would like you guys to join me to welcome Frank Pope.
Thank you, David. Well, great to be back here with all of you. As David said, today we'd like to do something a little bit different, and we want to tell you a story. And it's a story I've wanted to tell for a long time, and it's a story that David has been absolutely integral to creating and helping us to understand. I think too often in the world of wildlife, we're focused on only the big picture. And the big picture is, of course, really important. We need those overall numbers and the trends. These are the vital statistics that help guide our actions. But to understand elephants, we have to focus on individuals, because elephants are individuals like any of you. So in order to unpick this world of the elephants, I'm going to introduce you to Luna. Okay, and Luna's checking us out too. You can tell by the tip of her trunk. She's twisted around to try and get our scent. And Luna was she's a female elephant from the north of Kenya, and she was born in the year 2000, which makes Luna a millennial. Okay, and you can tell she's a millennial. She's a little bit reclusive, and she's always using this little techno gadget of hers to send little messages to her friends. Okay, and you can see her techno gadget there, and that's her collar, and we're her friends, and she sends us a message every hour, on the hour, to let us know where she is and how she's getting along. Now, Luna's mother Luna's mother was a lady called Neptune. And Neptune had 3 other little boys and a little girl. And Luna was from a very powerful family, and Neptune's sisters and cousins were a bunch of sisters and cousins called Saturn, Mercury, Gaia, and Venus. And they're from a family we call the planets in Samburu. And they were led by a wise and experienced matriarch called Dunia. Now, Dunia means earth in Kiswahili. Each of these elephants had a handful of offspring, and in our naming system, motherhood earns you a name. Before that, you're just a number, and you're a number that refers to your mother and the year that you were born. Elephant lifespans are a lot like our own. Their life histories, they mature at about the same age as we do, and given a chance, they'll die at about this, live as long as we do. Sometime between the ages of 7 and 12, in elephant world, boys become too much of a nuisance. Okay, so like I said, elephants are very similar to us. I'm the father of 3 girls, and one of them is actually called Luna, I should mention. No relation. So in an elephant world, when these boys, the other thing that's different about elephants and people is that elephants are a little less patient when boys become a nuisance. And between the ages of 7 and 12, they'll get kicked out of the family quite aggressively, and they'll spend 1 or 2 years trailing around at the edges of the herd before they get the message, and then start hanging out with other bulls and go on to live their life independently as bulls, only coming together with females at crucial times. The girls stick together, though, as they grow up. And when the planet's family was all together after the rains, when living is good, it's kind of elephant Thanksgiving, I guess, the planets were more than 30 strong. And this is a photo of the planets back in 2004. And we think that Luna is this little girl here on the front right. And she's having a glorious time. She's in the bosom of her family, and she's got not a care in the world other than chasing cattle egrets or baboons. That's probably what's happening over here. Yeah. At this time, 2004, the planets were one of Samburu National Reserves, or the ecosystem of reserves we have. It was one of their most dominant families. And they had the pick of all the best shade, feeding areas, and I think they definitely had the most fun when it came to bath time. And this is them there. So elephants across northern Kenya were thriving at this time. They were recovering from an elephant holocaust that had wiped out half their population in just a decade between the 70s and 80s. And across the savannas of East Africa, elephant populations were thriving. And the living seemed especially good in northern Kenya. The nomadic pastoralist tribes, who you've met some members of from northern Kenya, have always lived alongside elephants. And the Samburu are the Samburu have a particularly rich, have a particularly rich and harmonious relationship with elephants and other wildlife. And it's perhaps as a result of this long history of harmonious relationship with the Samburu that the elephants in our area are so calm and approachable. And it made Samburu a really wonderful place to come, and if you want a close encounter with elephants, there's very few places that's better than Samburu. That's made it a haven for photographers, filmmakers, visitors, and of course makes it a wonderful place to study elephants. So this is where Ian Douglas Hamilton set up Save the Elephants' first research camp back in 1998. And was set up really to try and deepen our understanding of the world of elephants and how we can secure them a future. And our researchers sometimes don't have to go very far. Here's Chuck Yeager having breakfast outside a researcher's tent. So as well as founding Save the Elephants, Ian was the co-founder of another really glorious and impressive institution, Saba, my wife. And here she is, putting on a collar with Ian and David. Tracking elephants like Luna, well, studying them as individuals helps open a window into their society, but tracking them is how we can open up a deeper understanding of how they make decisions. Ian had put the first tracking collars on elephants back in 1965 in Manyara National Park in Tanzania. And back then, the sort of tracking devices they had were based on a VHF beacon that just would go beep, beep, and you'd have to triangulate. If you got 3 fixes a week, you were doing intensive monitoring. When we put a tracking collar on Luna's mother, Neptune, it was one of the first GPS collars that we deployed. And now using the satellite network, we could get a fix every hour, on the hour, and in near real time. So this was a revolution in our understanding of the sort of detail of elephant lives. In 2009, a terrible drought began to bite in northern Kenya. Elephants are great survivors, but the planets began to suffer. They began to break into smaller and smaller units, and as they searched for food and got thinner and thinner, and gradually the elephants around them began dying. This little guy's not dead, by the way, he's just playing in the mud. But among the carcasses of those who died from the drought, we started finding something far more sinister. We started finding the carcasses of elephants who had been shot to death, their faces hacked off and their tusks pulled out. Only a year before, in 2008, the UN's Wildlife Trade Convention had decided to loosen the rules on the wildlife trade ban, or the ivory trade ban, that had stopped the Holocaust of the 70s and 80s. And they allowed a sale of stockpiled ivory to Japan and to China, whose economy was exploding. Our team was forced to transform from behavioral researchers into crime scene investigators. The planets got caught up in this unfolding catastrophe. Sometime on the night of the 15th of March, they were attacked. And we don't know exactly what happened, but poachers often strike at sunset, killing in the dying light, so that their deeds are soon cloaked in darkness. Neptune probably sensed the threat and would have wheeled around to protect her family and confront the danger, her ears out and her trunks up. But gunshots rang out. And then screaming would have started. Neptune falls to the dust, falls to the ground, and there's confusion everywhere, laced with the smell of cordite. Luna and her 2 brothers run for their mother. One of them's aged 5, one of them's aged just 1. Wild with panic. But then more gunshots hammer through the evening air, and they're forced to flee without being able to grieve for their fallen mother. David and the team ran into Luna the next day in Samburu National Reserve. She was cowering in a bush, terrified still, with a gunshot wound to her leg. There was no sign of her brothers. The killing continued all that year. The scale of the landscape up in the north of Kenya is such that only rarely did we find a carcass that was still in a state where we could identify the individual. But when family members disappeared and failed to return, we often feared the worst. In November, Gaia disappeared with her 3 sons, followed by Saturn and her son and granddaughter. In 2010, Duniya's grandson, Pluto's son, and Duniya herself died. We don't know how Duniya died. Was it natural? She was 60 years old, a good age for an elephant in the wild. Was it natural, or did she die protecting her family in that fury of bravery that is a matriarch? We'll never know. The drought in northern Kenya broke later that month, but the killing went on unabated. Venus died. She was the first elephant to have been lost inside a protected area, and that gave us an indication that the crisis really was getting worse. And as 2011 rolled around, we had some babies born, which was kind of miraculous given what was going on. But that was offset by the loss of Venus's young babies. Uranus and her daughter died, followed by Jupiter, Luna's sister, Mercury, and Callisto. Now, at this time, poachers weren't really wasting bullets on baby elephants with tiny ivory. But all too often, those young, traumatized elephants died anyway from lack of their mother's milk or starvation, predation sometimes, and sometimes we think just straight depression. So Mercury's sons died, Callisto's son died, and then all the males and females. By the end of 2012, all that remained of the mighty planet's family was 9 traumatized, terrified elephants. We had Pluto, Duniya's daughter Europa and her 3 sons, Saturn's daughter Haumea, Luna, who was 10, and a couple of others. Out of the 1,000 known elephants that we had on record in Samburu, that we knew to use the reserve, almost half of the known females over 30 years old were lost between 2006 and 2011. And the bulls, who carry bigger ivory and are therefore more of a target, they fared even worse. In the year 2000, we had 38 of these magnificent guys over 30 years old. And by 2011, only 5 of them remained. This is Matt, who was one of the survivors, and he lived on until last week when he died of natural causes on last Wednesday. He was a magnificent, far-ranging elephant. Our research estimates that over 100,000 elephants were killed for their ivory in just 3 years between 2010 and 2012. You can imagine how distressing this was for our team and how desperate we were. But as so often in a crisis, people came together and a coalition began to form. The tracking data that had primarily just been used by researchers up until then, we started sharing with partners, and in the hands of the Kenya Wildlife Service and the Lewa Wildlife Conservancy and the Northern Rangelands Trust and all the alliance of organizations in the north, it started guiding a more effective patrolling and deployment of rangers. Guns and boots were part of the solution, but in a landscape where elephants share the landscape with humans, these kind of meetings were even more important. Congregating under thorn trees for long afternoons, talking to elders and mothers, identifying and ostracizing those responsible for the killing. Public outrage in Kenya started to grow, fueled by a wonderful organization called Wildlife Direct. They started organizing protests, and the outrage grew all the way up into the highest levels. And then at our very lowest hour in 2012, our partners Wild Aid asked us to introduce the great Chinese basketball star Yao Ming to elephants. So David took him out to see elephants, and we also showed him the crisis. China at this time was committed to maintaining their age-old tradition of ivory carving, But if we couldn't change that, then we were finished. There was going to be no end to the crisis. So David and Yao became firm friends, and Yao invited David back to Beijing. That is not photoshopped. So they went back to Beijing to help spread the message of what Yao had seen in China to his people and to his government. And everyone felt like they were getting involved. It was actors and activists and sportsmen and citizens, celebrities and politicians. Everyone was getting involved, and the movement was growing and gaining more and more momentum. And after 2012, the situation in northern Kenya started to slow. The poaching started to slow, and it's continued ever since. By 2014, there were more elephants being born than were dying, and today we've got very little ivory poaching anywhere in Kenya. It still exists, but it's at low levels. Thank you. Unfortunately, that's not the case everywhere, and in many places across Central and Eastern Africa, the crisis continued unabated. Just to the south of Kenya and Tanzania, they lost 60% of Africa's, what was at the time Africa's second largest elephant population in just 4 years. Iconic populations in Mozambique, Democratic Republic of Congo, and elsewhere were all being devastated, and the forests of Central Africa were just being emptied of elephants. What had worked in Kenya so well was this coalition of organizations coming together to take on the crisis. And looking out across Africa, it was clear that there were many excellent organizations just ready to do the job, and they were well placed to take on the challenge. The problem was that either they were small, tiny, deeply embedded field units that needed help and strategic advice to scale up to take on this new challenge, or they were big, capable organizations who had a suite of other priorities on the table, and they needed, they had a whole range of other priorities. So what we did in 2014 was team up with the Wildlife Conservation Network and launch the first of the crisis funds, the Elephant Crisis Fund. And our mission was to get support out to the organizations doing the best work to stop the killing, stop the trafficking, and stop the demand for ivory. And a crucial element was this 100% model that every dollar would go straight to the field organizations with minimal bureaucracy and quick mobilization. And sure enough, a network of partners started to grow, sharing strategies and intelligence. And this collaborative action started building, and this time on a continental, even global scale. And we called on you at this expo from this stage to help. And so you are all part of this broad success. And any success that the Elephant Crisis Fund has enjoyed through the brave actions of their partners is all thanks to people such as yourselves. 5 years on, the Elephant Crisis Fund has distributed over $20 million to 76 partners in 37 countries. Thank you. These partners are accomplishing great things against enormous odds. Populations on the brink of collapse. This picture's from Garamba, it's just one example. The situation was absolutely devastating there, but they doubled down and they re-strategized, and they've turned around a situation which looked close to being untenable. Other populations in Mali, we have the Wild Foundation here, they've managed to stabilize the killing and prevent the loss of the last remaining desert elephants of the Gourma, even in the face of a very violent Islamic insurgency. Previously untouchable traffickers are now facing the full force of the law. And the Chinese government banned the trade in ivory and has become our most critical ally in the fight against the ivory trade. Back in Samburu, the storm had passed and a recovery was beginning. And after those terrible years, the oldest female left in Luna's family was an elephant called Europa, Dunia's daughter. She was 24 years old at the time. But she was alone and immature and trying to hold her family together, but she wasn't coping. She couldn't get others to follow. Critical for a matriarch. And so Luna started spending more and more time alone, without the love and memory and experience of those elder females. She had to learn a new way to survive. So she started spending time with an elephant called Alpine. And we spoke about elephants being individuals. Turns out that Alpine is just a very kind and tolerant elephant, and started spending time with Luna and gave Luna the time of day. And normally elephants won't suckle another's baby, but you do get instances where they will adopt an elephant once they've been weaned. And Alpine's a great example of that, and she's now got quite a reputation for taking in these young elephants. And here she is with another young orphan called Orchid. So Luna developed a very strong relationship with Alpine, and if you ever want your heart warmed up, you go and watch those two meeting after they've been apart for a while, and it's the most tumultuous pandemonium of greeting, and they spend a lot of time in bodily contact, Luna kind of backing up to Alpine, which is a great sign of affection. This adoption behavior is actually a fascinating part of a wider story. So we've been looking at this through our database, and what we've seen is that these social networks that elephants develop are far more resilient than anyone knew. And what seems to be happening is that mothers will introduce their children to friends of theirs. I'm putting this in human speak, but this is what seems to be happening. They'll introduce them to friends of theirs, and then years, sometimes decades down the line, if the mother's no longer there, that friend becomes a trusted contact that the child will interact with. We don't know if that's what's happened between Luna and Alpine, but there's certainly something there. So Luna's auntie, Europa, was no longer part of this powerful dynasty. And this is the reserve system in the Wasanyura, where you've been hearing a bit about today, and the reserves of Samburu and Buffalo Springs are over here. This is where she was in Samburu, but she started getting displaced over to the east to Shaba, which is a much more dangerous area, beset with sort of quite a lot of tribal insecurity, a lot of cattle raiding, and not much law enforcement going on. So Europa was over there. It doesn't look far as the crow flies between these two reserves, or as the elephant walks, I should say. But appearances can be deceptive. So we've got, between the two, there's a town of Archer's Post. And then the Cape to Cairo road slices down between the two as well. In 2013, we started tracking Luna as part of a wider study into how orphans behave. Now, back when we started tracking her, the road was potholed and corrugated, pretty slow. Not much threat there, and the settlements along the road were temporary mud huts, and there were very few fences. These days, the journey's become quite a lot more complicated. Approaching the eastern end of Buffalo Springs National Reserve, she may start picking up the scent of livestock, and of course, armed human guardians. And elephants are highly sensitive to risk, but after Luna's experience, doubly so. So, on getting too close to these herds, she flees, and elephants tend to streak in a straight line quite fast when they're threatened. The road is no longer a rough track, but has now been tarmacked and is a much faster, more populated highway. The road doesn't bring just traffic, of course, it brings development. And what used to be these temporary huts of mud and sticks are turning into permanent houses, roadside shops, and fenced properties. and this ribbon of humanity threatens to block her path. If it does, it'll cause conflict as she tries to push through, or perhaps even prevent her from making the journey entirely. To keep this connectivity intact and prevent the conflict, Save the Elephants has worked with the communities surrounding Archer's Post to designate corridors. And these are strips of land left wild that run from the road into the bush that will be kept free of settlement to allow elephants and other wildlife, as well as livestock, free passage. Now, at the moment, there's still enough space. This is a sort of future projection of what things look like, but it's really clear which way things are going. And we've only shown one corridor here, but in fact, the community's designated 4 corridors on the basis of the elephant tracking data where they would like to be able to preserve the connectivity. Looking after these corridors is a team of dedicated women employed by Save the Elephants, and in the WCN tradition, they're called the Mama Tembos. Tembo is Kiswahili for elephant. And these elephant mothers monitor the use of the corridor every day and report any settlement, and they also crucially act as ambassadors for elephants in the community. Luna can pass through this corridor and then into Shaba National Reserve, where she slows down. It's not as safe a reserve as Samburu, but she's able to navigate that, and probably guided by the scents on the hot air, or maybe the low frequency rumbles that she hears or feels through her feet. She's guided back, and we've seen her reunite with Europa over in Shaba several times, and it's also always very energetic greeting. A key priority of ours is to keep connectivity like this open. Development is coming, and fast, and there's another infrastructure project coming in with oil, rail, and a road pipeline that's slicing east to west through the same area. And in other areas of their range, human developments are threatening to choke off important passageways for elephants. And this is one of the things we really urgently need to do, is to scale up the work to define these corridors nationally and employ more ladies like the Mama Tembos to secure community support and patrol corridors that have been defined. Now, across Africa, we've got about 350 elephants that are being tracked through the systems that Save the Elephants has detected, has set up. And these are not being, we're not funding all of these collars. These are just collars that are using the system, and it's not, these tracking systems are not even just restricted to elephants. We've got 6 other species using our tracking systems at this time. And we've developed algorithms to run on the tracking data that can send you a message if an elephant crosses a virtual line, or if an elephant starts moving unnaturally slowly or unusually fast. We get some alerts via text messages in these cases. What we dread more than anything else is an immobility alert. And one January morning in 2014, we got a message that made our blood run cold. Luna's collar was immobile. And these collars are made of a machine belting that is designed to wear out after a time. You don't want elephants being saddled with a collar if they move out of your area, or if you can't take it off. But Luna's collar had only been on for a few months, and this was far too soon. And when we saw the alert, her collar had been immobile for 5 hours already. The alert coordinates were on the edge of Samburu National Reserve, and only a short drive from our research camp. And fearing the worst, David led a team out there with rangers from the reserve, guided by the last GPS position. And as they got closer, they couldn't get any closer with the car, so they went in on foot, guided by the VHF backup beacon in the collar. After walking for another half hour, they spotted a group of elephants in a tight defensive circle, highly emotional, and fluid streaming from their temporal glands. Peering through the bushes, David realized that it was Europa, and her family, all the way over in Samburu, quite far from their usual haunt, and close to Luna's last recorded position. And in amongst them, David saw Luna, and by her side, a tiny calf. Luna hadn't been stopped by a bullet at all. She'd stopped to give birth. So for Luna to have given birth is a very good sign. Often elephants will stop breeding when times are tough, and though that first calf sadly died, she soon gave birth to another, and she's turned out to be a very good mother. And with her slight limp and very smooth ear outline, and she's got one small piercing in one ear, a little hole, Luna is very easily recognized by our team. She's shy, as we know, but evidently has got a great drive to survive. And through forging new friendships, she's managed to figure out life, as well as teaching us surprising lessons about how elephant society can transcend the loss of key individuals. Elephants are great survivors. Northern Kenya's elephant population continues to expand. And we've now got over 7,500 elephants in the population. And released from the... What's even more exciting is that released from the threat of poaching, they're starting to expand their range again. And we've just started tracking some elephants up in a place called the Ndoto Mountains, where elephants haven't been seen for 30 years when they arrived, and people were very scared when they found them. But we started tracking those elephants. And shortly after that, in a period of good rains, we had some elephants from that population go all the way up the eastern shore of Lake Turkana onto a place called Mount Kulao, where elephants were hunted out in the middle of the 19th century. So there is space for elephants. But Africa is changing fast. And many of these wild areas are going to develop, and human populations are going to increase in those areas. And we know that elephants like Luna and her baby are going to face new obstacles. What we don't know is how quickly these changes are going to take place. And we don't know quite how elephants are going to react to this new situation. Is that me? So this story is really already unfolding, and we need to get much better at tracking. We need to do more tracking. We need to get better at interpreting it. We need to build our system so we can do it more efficiently and effectively. Then we need to get better at sharing this knowledge, not only with our partners, but with local community members, with county governments, with national leadership. And all this should be about trying to create smart development so that people can prosper while elephants continue having the freedom to roam. And it's important that elephants continue having the freedom to roam, because as they roam, they clear old branches and old trees, and they eat seeds and then plant new trees as they go. And new research has just suggested that forests with elephants in them absorb fully 7% more carbon than forests without. This intricate dance of these wild species with their natural environment is what creates the oxygen that we breathe and absorbs the carbon dioxide that we exhale, not only as individuals, but as a civilization. These ecosystems are what keeps this planet alive. All we need to do is give life space. And whether it's defending areas, protected areas, cultivating harmonious relationships between people and wildlife, or creating connectivity, you can help us create the space, not just for Luna and the other elephants, but for all the species that you've been hearing about today. So I'd just like to say, on behalf of all my friends and fellow conservationists that have been here today and that you've heard from. Just a big thank you for joining us in this fight to win space for our living planet. Thank you.